My name is Dolores Whitmore, and this is the story of how I spent a lifetime building my daughter's future, only to be thanked with a check and a pat on the head. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. You might actually regret missing out on this dramatic story. It was Mother's Day, the kind of warm spring morning when birds chatter like nosy neighbors, and the scent of freshly cut grass reminds you that time, like love, keeps moving even when you wish it would stop. I'd spent the morning ironing my best blouse, the pale blue one my late husband always said brought out the dignity in my face. I wasn't sure what that meant, but he said it with so much affection, I chose to believe it was something beautiful. The doorbell rang at 11. Dorosanam. And there she was, my daughter Paige, in her cream-colored linen dress, the one that always made her look like a senator's wife. Her diamond earrings glittered. Her hair looked like it had been styled by someone who charges by the hour. And her smile, well, that wasn't styled. It was thin, polite, performative. Behind her stood a man in a tight black polo shirt holding a velvet gift bag. I let her in. She kissed my cheek air only and walked in like she owned the place. Maybe she thought she did. She sat down at my table, declining tea, declining scones, declining everything but the chair with the softest cushion. And then she said it. I know you like practical things, so we wired you a $50,000 gift. It's already in your account. No need to say thank you. No card. No hug. No effort. Just the transaction of appreciation sealed with an emoji smile in her tone. I blinked. Thank you, I whispered. She nodded like a CEO approving a quarterly report. We figured you'd want to fix up the house. Maybe travel? Or, prepare. Prepare for what? For dying. For being less of an inconvenience. I nodded back, because silence had always been my armor. But something inside me cracked that morning. Not enough to break me. Just enough to remind me I still had edges. We ate in silence. She scrolled her phone. I folded napkins. And before long, she stood up, air-kissed me again, and left with a cheerful, "Love you, Mom." As the door clicked shut, I sat down at my own kitchen table and stared at the flowers she brought, white lilies. Funereal. Then I opened my phone. That's when I saw it. On her public social media, Paige had posted a carousel of photos, wide shots of a sprawling ranch house with wraparound porches, a full stable, a man-made lake. The caption read, "When someone becomes your second mother, they deserve the world. Happy early Mother's Day to the woman who taught me how to be a wife. Grateful ranch life family first." The comments glowed. So thoughtful. 500K gift. You're incredible. True class. And there she was, standing with her mother-in-law, a woman I'd seen maybe twice, holding a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a ranch. A $500,000 ranch. Meanwhile, I sat in my chair with 50,000 silent dollars and a heart full of noise. I didn't cry. I'm not that kind of woman. Instead, I stood, walked to my husband's old desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a file I hadn't touched in years. It was labeled, "Whitmore Trust, in case of death." I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had a feeling that whatever Paige thought she owned wasn't hers yet. The folder smelled faintly of old ink and cedar. It had sat undisturbed for over a decade, buried beneath expired insurance policies, retirement account summaries, and notes in my late husband's handwriting. Tight, slanted, mathematical, like a man always planning something just beyond the horizon. I laid everything out on the kitchen table, my hands steady, my mind anything but. Inside the folder was a letter sealed in an envelope with my name written across it. Dolores. The handwriting stopped my breath. I ran my fingers across it like it might pulse back. I broke the seal. "My dearest D, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it also means that I trusted you to stay the same, wise, measured, and patient. But if you're here because Paige has become someone neither of us expected, then I need you to know you are not alone." I swallowed hard. He knew. He always saw her more clearly than I did. I was the soft one. He was the boundary. I created a contingency trust. You remember Henry Travers, our old friend from Rotary? He helped me. If Paige ever became unkind, if she forgot herself, this will give you control of the rest. The rest. I kept reading. There was a full trust document enclosed legal complex and astonishing. 20 years ago, when my husband had sold off a large piece of inherited land to developers, he had parked $4 million in a silent trust. He'd designated me the primary trustee upon his death. Paige. She was never the owner, only a conditional beneficiary. And the conditions: kindness, communication, dignity. If she failed to treat me with visible respect and consistent care, she forfeited everything. Everything? I laughed. A soft, bitter, breathless laugh. My husband always the chess player. Always one step ahead. But the strangest part? The documents had been updated again just a few years before his death. And he'd added something else. A clause that would allow me to redirect the trust, not just withhold it. I could choose where the money went next. A foundation, a scholarship, a friend, anyone. Just not her. I sat there in silence for a long time. The house creaked. The lilies drooped. Outside, the sun moved across the window like time shaking its head. When Paige was young, I used to work 3 jobs. I took on tutoring in the evenings, ran adult education classes on weekends, and sold Avon door to door just to afford her piano lessons and private school. I'd sew patches into her uniforms while helping her memorize spelling lists. When she wanted to study abroad, I cashed in my pension early. I had built her life with my bare hands, bit by bit, breath by breath. And yet, somewhere along the way, love had turned transactional. Motherhood had been downgraded to performance. And now, in her eyes, I was just a liability with a mortgage. A week after Mother's Day, Paige called again. "Did the wire go through?" she asked cheerfully. "It did," I said, folding laundry as if nothing had shifted beneath the earth. She chatted about her in-laws, about expanding their vineyard. She mentioned planning a luxury vacation, something about Tuscany and private chefs. I listened. I made polite sounds. "I hope the money helps," she said. "It should last you a while." "It will," I said. "Thank you, sweetheart." She hung up, thinking she had done her part, that the ledger of daughterhood had been balanced. But I wasn't keeping score anymore. I was rewriting the rules. Later that evening, I called Henry Travers. Yes, he still remembered me. Yes, he still had access to the trust. Yes, he'd meet me in person. He didn't sound surprised. "I always wondered when this day would come," he said. I didn't cry, not even after hanging up. Instead, I put on a pot of tea. Earl Grey, my husband's favorite. Then I sat at the table, looked at the old documents again, and smiled to myself. I had been quiet long enough, and Paige had just reminded me how much noise silence could make. The office hadn't changed since the last time I visited it 13 years ago, back when grief still clung to my clothes like perfume, and the idea of estate planning sounded like something reserved for the wealthy. Now it felt like coming full circle. Henry Travers greeted me at the door with a kind smile and tired eyes. His white hair had thinned, but his presence was as solid as ever. The man had once been my husband's best friend and the only lawyer he ever trusted. "Dolores," he said, shaking my hand gently. "You look resolute." "I feel overdue," I replied. He chuckled. We sat down in his glass-walled office overlooking the courthouse lawn. He offered coffee. I declined. My hands were steady. My voice was even. But something within me hummed like a wire finally carrying current. Henry placed a thick file on the desk. "I assume you read everything?" "Yes." "And you understand the clause about continued moral conduct?" "I do." He nodded. "You're well within your rights to remove her. You're not required to prove anything in court. Your discretion is protected by the clause your husband insisted on." My husband always believed in kindness, but he prepared for cruelty. "I want to reallocate the trust," I said. "To?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I just know who it won't go to." He raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. We signed some papers. He notarized my signature. Everything was legal. Everything was quiet. And then he said something I didn't expect. "You know, when he came to me about the trust, he told me something strange." "What's that?" Henry leaned back in his chair. He said, "Paige may one day buy Dolores a house. But if she does it only after she buys someone else a mansion, that's not love. That's reputation maintenance." I stared at him. "He was always watching," I murmured. Henry slid a small envelope across the desk. He left this with me, for you, if you ever came back. I opened it slowly. Inside was a note, only one sentence scrawled in that unmistakable script. Don't ever confuse being silent with being small. On the drive home, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel powerful. I felt vindicated and tired. When I got back to my house, I sat on the porch with a blanket and watched the sunset paint the sky like it owed me an apology. That night, I went back online. I scrolled Paige's social media again. The ranch had gone viral. Influencer blogs were reposting it, calling it the gift every mother-in-law dreams of. One comment stood out. Meanwhile, real moms get socks in silence. Lol. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then I made the mistake of checking the comments on my own page. The ones under the few photos Paige had posted of me years ago. The ones that made me look like a sweet, forgotten relic. Some stranger wrote, "She should be grateful to get anything at all. 50K. That's more than most people make in a year." Another chimed in, "Sounds like an entitled boomer. Crying over not getting a house. Please." And Paige liked both comments. That stung more than I thought it would. I didn't reply. I never do. But I did go to my attic and open a box I hadn't touched in decades. Inside were handwritten notes from Paige as a child. To the best mommy in the world. Drawings of stick figures and suns. Crayon rainbows and promises of never growing up too fast. What a strange thing to be both cherished in memory and discarded in reality. I spent the next morning doing something I hadn't done in years, making a list. A list of women I'd known, friends, neighbors, students who had no family or worse families, who had forgotten them. Women who had built homes, lives, and legacies only to be set aside for shinier replacements. I underlined one name, Marta, my former colleague, widowed. Her son never calls. Then another, Joyce. Once a single mother, now caring for her granddaughter, while her daughter chased influencers and failed businesses. I smiled as I added more names. Because if Paige didn't know the worth of what she had, I'd make sure someone else did. The funny thing about betrayal is how quiet it can be. It doesn't always show up with shouting matches or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes dressed in silk, wrapped in smiles, and delivered with a bank transfer. That week, Paige invited me to dinner. Not at her house, no. She was too busy renovating. Not at the ranch, that's for Chad's mom, you know how she gets. She chose a rooftop restaurant downtown. The kind with minimalist menus and dim lighting that makes everyone look 10 years younger. I wore my best slacks. Pressed blouse. A small brooch my husband gave me in 1981, the year Paige was born. I arrived 10 minutes early. She arrived 15 minutes late. Sorry, she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. Traffic was wild. No apology for the delay. No acknowledgement of the silence since Mother's Day. She ordered champagne before we'd even said grace. As we ate overpriced salads, she began to speak, not to ask how I was, but to list her plans. Chad and I are expanding into wine exports now. And Mom, his mom, not. You wants to host vineyard weddings on the ranch. Isn't that brilliant? I blinked. She caught herself. I mean, I know it's not your thing. Dirt and horses and all that. Then, like it was a favor, she asked, "Did you get the money? Okay?" "Yes." "Good," she said. "That should help with bills and stuff. I always worry about you living alone." "You always worry, but you never visit." I nodded. I didn't want her guilt. I wanted her truth. She kept talking. About branding, investment partners. How hard it was to juggle being a woman and an entrepreneur these days. She called herself a self-made woman. I smiled into my soup. When the check came, she reached for it with flourish. "Let me," she said. "I owe you that much." I almost laughed. She had no idea. We hugged goodbye in the parking garage. Another air kiss. She smelled of bergamot and ambition. As she turned to leave, she said, "I hope you know how much I appreciate everything you did, Mom. I couldn't have gotten here without you." Then she disappeared into a luxury SUV she didn't even drive herself, and I stood there under fluorescent parking lights thinking, if I raised her, who raised this? Back home, I opened my old laptop and began writing. A letter, not to Paige, but to myself. I wrote down everything she'd forgotten. The nights I stayed awake during her pneumonia, placing cold cloths on her burning forehead while she screamed for help. The time I sold my engagement ring to pay for her piano recital trip. The birthday when I made a 7-layer cake from scratch because she read about it in a book. I wrote until my fingers ached. Then I opened the trust documents again and called Henry. "Can we redirect the funds into something charitable?" I asked. "Absolutely," he replied. "Then I'd like to establish something," I said. And I told him the name. The Whitmore Women's Legacy Fund. A trust that would provide emergency grants to women over 60, especially those abandoned by their families or facing medical bills alone. We drafted the paperwork. I selected the first two recipients, Marta and Joyce. Each received a $100,000 grant to stabilize their homes, pay off their mortgages, and restore a bit of dignity that life or loved ones had taken from them. Paige's inheritance, quietly reduced. I didn't remove her entirely. Not yet. There's still time. There's always time for a lesson to find its moment. But I wanted her to feel safe first, and then see what safety looks like. When it leaves. A week later, Paige called again. This time not for brunch, not for pleasantries. She was upset. Apparently, an estate planning blog had published an article about the new foundation. Someone at the nonprofit had leaked the press release early. She'd read it. "Mom, what is this Whitmore Women's Fund? You don't even have a board. You don't have the resources for this. Where's the money coming from?" I paused, then said, "It's coming from the same place your ranch did." Silence. "You mean from the trust?" "I mean," I replied, "from your father. And from me. And from every woman who never got to say what she really wanted to say on Mother's Day." Her voice dropped. "You're punishing me." "No," I said softly. "I'm remembering myself." She hung up. No goodbye. That night, I sat on my porch again, holding a warm cup of chamomile tea, listening to the cicadas hum in the distance. For the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt found. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not in the way they used to be. Not the kind of quiet that comes from being excluded or overlooked. No, this quiet was purposeful. It was the stillness of a plan taking root beneath the soil of something long buried finally growing. Paige didn't call. Not for Father's Day, not to ask about the foundation, not even to send one of those vague thinking of you texts she used to drop when she felt obligated. I thought I might miss her. But I didn't, because something beautiful was beginning to happen. The Whitmore Women's Legacy Fund started getting letters. Handwritten ones, typed ones, emails with spelling errors and trembling voices. "I'm 68. My son moved away after my husband died. I can't afford my medication. I raised 3 daughters. None of them talk to me now. I rent a room in someone's basement. Could your fund help with my dental bill? I'm not asking for money. I just wanted to say thank you. Your story made me feel less invisible." And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a discarded chapter. I felt like the author of something new. I met with Marta and Joyce for tea at the community center. We sat under a sun-dappled awning with lemon cakes and strong coffee. We didn't talk about our daughters or the disappointments that came with them. We talked about gardening. We laughed. We even planned a small summer retreat for women like us. Women who had been asked to give everything and expected to ask for nothing in return. That's when I realized something fundamental. It wasn't about Paige's betrayal anymore. It wasn't about the ranch. It wasn't even about the $50,000 check. It was about the scale. The imbalance between what we pour out and what we are poured into. For years I had given and given, believing that love would eventually echo back. But for some of us, it doesn't echo. For some of us, love becomes a locked vault, guarded by people who think their success was self-made, forgetting the scaffolding we built for them. Then one morning, my neighbor, sweet young Melissa, who worked at the local news station, knocked on my door. "I hope this isn't weird," she said, eyes wide. "But? Are you the Dolores Whitmore who started that foundation?" "I suppose I am." Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost reverent. Would you mind doing an interview?" I blinked. "I'm not much for cameras." She laughed. "You wouldn't need to say much. We just want to tell the story. A woman giving back. A mother building a legacy. It's beautiful. And real." I hesitated. but then I remembered that silence is a choice. Okay, I said. Let's do it. The segment aired 3 days later. A simple 5-minute story. No drama, just facts. A few photos of me in my garden. Shots of Marta and Joyce receiving their grants. A closing line from me. Sometimes the people we love the most teach us what not to do. And in that lesson we find our purpose. The clip went modestly viral. Not internet-breaking viral, but enough. Enough that it landed on Paige's radar. She texted me that night. Nice to know you're suddenly famous. Also nice to know you're using Dad's money to play hero. Hope you enjoy the attention. I stared at the message for a long time. Then finally I replied, you used my love to build your foundation. I'm using your disregard to build mine. We both got what we wanted. She never wrote back. A few days later, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo of Paige and her mother-in-law standing in front of the ranch with a for sale sign. Written in sharp ink across the back were 5 words. Hope it was worth it. I didn't know if it was Paige's handwriting. It didn't matter. She was unraveling. Because when someone builds their identity on performance and you stop being their audience, the spotlight suddenly burns instead of shines, and she was starting to feel the heat. I poured myself a glass of red wine that night, sat on the porch, let the breeze carry away the last threads of guilt I ever felt for raising a daughter who forgot how to look back. And I told myself aloud, quietly, confidently, I may have given her life, but I don't owe her the rest of mine. I hadn't planned on attending the charity gala. It was hosted by the City Council, a fancy affair for their Women of Impact series, and I assumed it would be filled with corporate jargon and cold chicken dinners. But Marta and Joyce insisted. You can't start a revolution in silence, Joyce teased, even if it's a quiet one. So I put on the navy blue dress I'd saved from my retirement ceremony, still fit, still dignified. I pinned my husband's brooch to the collar, curled my hair, and applied a soft coat of lipstick that hadn't seen daylight in years. The gala was held at the Botanic Conservatory, transformed that night into a lantern-lit dream. Rows of white chairs, live cello music, tables named after flowers. Someone had named my table Wild Iris. I liked that. Wild, persistent, impossible to kill. When they called my name during the awards segment, I nearly didn't stand. But Marta squeezed my hand. I walked slowly to the podium under soft lights. The applause was respectful, warm, not loud but meaningful, and I knew it wasn't for the foundation. It was for what it represented. They handed me a glass award with my name etched on it. Dolores Whitmore Legacy Through Grace. I smiled into the microphone. I'm not here because I have money. I'm here because I once gave everything I had to someone who forgot me. And when they did, I remembered myself. The room held its breath. So I decided to give again. But this time, to those who remember what it means to be seen. Thunderous applause, not performative but real. And seated 3 rows from the front, I saw a familiar face. Paige. Hair, sleek black dress, perfect lips pressed in a line she likely practiced in the mirror. Chad was not with her. She clapped just enough, but her eyes didn't smile. I didn't break eye contact. Not because I wanted her to feel shame, but because I needed her to feel small, not as a punishment, but as a mirror. For years, I had let her walk taller by crouching down in motherhood, but now I stood straight. After the event, she approached. Impressive, she said, not quite sarcastic, not quite sincere. Thank you, I replied, voice calm. It's been a good season. She held her clutch tight. You didn't have to make this public. I didn't, I said. You did. When you made me invisible, her breath caught. I gave you money. You gave your mother-in-law a ranch. She needed a home. Paige said like that excused it. I needed a daughter, I replied. That stopped her. She blinked. And for a moment I saw the little girl I once raised, the one who used to cry when I worked late, who used to climb into my bed during storms and whisper, "Don't let go." But then her mouth hardened. I've built a life, Mom. One you could never understand. I nodded. You're right, I said softly. I built yours, not mine. The next day I rewrote the trust. With Henry's help, I made it irrevocable. Paige would receive exactly $1. Sheer so she can't say I forgot her, I joked. Just undervalued her. The rest, it would go to the fund, to the women, to the future. Months passed. I continued my quiet work meeting, women sending checks, building a network of voices that had once been whispers and were now steel. I no longer checked Paige's social media. But one day, while waiting at the doctor's office, I overheard two women talking. "You heard about Paige Whitmore?" One said. "The influencer, her foundation just collapsed. Some big investors pulled out. Something about family trust scandals and PR nightmares." I closed my eyes. Not out of satisfaction, but because I finally understood what my husband meant all those years ago. Reputation may look like gold, but character is the vault it sits in. And Paige had spent hers long ago. The news spread faster than I ever expected. Not because I had said anything, but because the truth has a strange way of catching the wind when people least expect it. Within a week, I was receiving emails from journalists, bloggers, even a documentary filmmaker who wanted to cover the quiet revolution of Dolores Whitmore. I declined them all. I hadn't done any of this for fame. Paige, on the other hand, had built her identity on optics, on shiny posts, and curated virtue. When the trust changes became public, people started digging. One news outlet released a timeline comparing her luxurious ranch gift to her modest Mother's Day donation. And just like that, the tide turned. Suddenly, people were questioning her philanthropy. Her brand's core message, family loyalty, generational wisdom, now rang hollow. She had built an empire on the illusion of reverence, and I had quietly pulled out the cornerstone. But I didn't gloat. Instead, I turned my attention to Florence. She was 81, a retired midwife who lived alone in a crumbling house on the edge of town. Her roof leaked, her knees were bad, and she still cooked meals for the local soup kitchen every Thursday. I had met her during a community event at the library. She didn't know who I was. She only knew that I'd brought lemon bars. We talked for hours. When she mentioned her dream of turning her backyard into a small urban herb garden for local teens, I felt something stir inside me. Later that night, I added her name to the list. And 2 weeks later, Florence received a check for $85,000, enough to repair her home and start her dream. She came to my house with a jar of lavender honey and tears in her eyes. "No one's ever believed in me like this," she said. I smiled. "You just needed someone to remember you before you were gone." She held my hand for a long time. And I realized in that moment this was motherhood too. Not biology. Witness. Presence. Memory. Meanwhile, Paige tried to recover. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had reached out to a crisis PR firm, that she was blaming family misunderstandings and personal grief, that she had offered to publicly donate to the foundation to show unity. When her assistant called my number to propose a joint appearance, I simply said, "There is no unity in silence that served only one side," and I hung up. It was the first time in my life I'd rejected my daughter without guilt. Then one morning I received a letter. Not an email. A real letter. The kind that smells like ink and folds like intention. It was from Paige. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, elegant, precise, the way she used to write thank you notes as a child after every birthday party. "Mom, I don't know where to start. I suppose I believed for too long that success was measured by how loud people clap. And I forgot the woman who taught me to stand tall in rooms that never applauded." I exhaled slowly. "I was cruel. I know that. And I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I am asking for a chance to remember the daughter I used to be. No excuses. No manipulation. If you're willing, I'd like to meet. Just coffee. Just two women who once knew each other better than anyone else." I folded the letter, let it sit beside my cup of tea. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't ready yet, but for the first time I believed the remorse was real. Not because she was losing sponsors, but because she had finally lost me. That evening, I walked down to the community garden where Florence and a group of teenage girls were planting basil and rosemary. She waved me over. "Dolores," she said, pointing to a wooden sign one of the girls had painted. "What do you think?" It read, "The Whitmore plot where women grow back." I felt my throat tighten. I touched the wood gently, then looked up at the sun setting behind a wall of marigolds. Maybe this was how it worked. Maybe when a daughter forgets her mother, the world sends you 100 daughters more. And they don't ask for money. They ask for witness. I finally agreed to meet Paige. Not because I needed her apology. No, that ship had sailed years ago. But because something inside me wanted to see if the little girl I raised, the one who once clung to my hand in grocery store aisles, still existed somewhere beneath the layers of ambition and pride. We chose a neutral place. A small coffee shop tucked between an antique bookstore and a flower stall. It was quiet, warm, and smelled of cinnamon and baked apples. A place where conversations didn't need to be loud to be heard. When I walked in, Paige was already seated. No designer dress this time. Just jeans, a white blouse, and hair tied back in a simple knot. She looked smaller, not in body but in presence. Like life had finally nudged her off the stage she had built. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "Hello, Paige." There was a long pause. A silence that wasn't cold but heavy like a blanket soaked with rain. She reached across the table. "I'm sorry." I studied her face. The sincerity in her eyes was unfamiliar, but not fake. "What are you sorry for?" I asked, not to challenge her, but because I needed to hear the truth. For forgetting," she said, voice trembling. "For thinking money could replace presence. For letting other people's approval matter more than yours. More than us." I nodded slowly. "You hurt me," I said. "Not because of the money, Paige, but because you made me feel like I was a chore on your list." Her eyes filled. "You were never a chore. You made me feel like one." She covered her face with her hands for a moment, then let out a breath that seemed to deflate her. "I lost myself somewhere. Mom," she whispered. "I wanted to impress them. Chad's family, the investors, the world. I wanted to prove I wasn't just a girl from a small town with a teacher mom." Teacher mom? The phrase made me smile bittersweet. "I wasn't ashamed of you," she added quickly. "I was ashamed of not being enough." I took a sip of my coffee watching her. It had been years since I'd seen this version of Paige, the unguarded one. "Paige," I said gently, "you became everything your father and I wanted for you. Strong, independent, successful. But somewhere along the way, you forgot the cost of success." Her lips trembled. "I know." I leaned forward. "Do you know why I built the foundation?" She shook her head. "Because I realized I had spent decades giving to one person, and I needed to remember how to give to many." She swallowed hard. "You're incredible, Mom. I don't deserve—" "Stop," I said softly. "It's not about deserving, it's about remembering who you are and who I am." We talked for 2 hours. About little things. About nothing. About everything. She told me she was selling the ranch. That her marriage to Chad wasn't as picture perfect as it looked. That the life she built had cracks she'd been too afraid to admit. "I don't want to lose you," she said at last. I looked at her. Really looked. The girl who once fell asleep on my lap at every fireworks show. The teenager who slammed doors but always came back crying. The woman who forgot me but now seemed to be finding herself. "Then don't," I said simply. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a mother again. That night, I returned home and sat on my porch, a soft summer breeze carrying the scent of lilies from my garden. I thought about forgiveness. How it isn't about forgetting or pretending the wound never happened. It's about looking at the scar and saying, "This pain made me grow." The Whitmore Women's Fund had received a surge of donations since the news segment aired. Strangers, local businesses, even former students of mine were sending checks. They wrote messages like, "You inspired me to call my mom today. Your story made me realize how much I've taken for granted." It was strange becoming a symbol, but it felt right. For the first time in decades, I wasn't living in Paige's shadow. She was standing in mine. 2 days later, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Paige. She stood on my porch with no makeup, no entourage, holding a box of pastries and a bottle of wine. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. "Mom," she said quietly, "I want to help the foundation. Not just with money. I want to show up, teach classes, mentor girls who don't have moms like you." I stared at her. "Why?" I asked. "Because I think I need to remember how to be human," she said, tears in her eyes. And for the first time in years, I believed her. It began slowly. Paige started coming to the weekly foundation meetings not as a figurehead, not as a donor with demands, but as a participant. She listened more than she spoke, took notes by hand, and sat with the women she once would have dismissed as irrelevant. She even asked Marta gently if she could shadow her for a day, as she coordinated the weekend meal delivery for housebound seniors. "You want to do delivery?" Marta asked with a half smile. "If you'll have me," Paige replied humbly, and that's when I saw it real contrition. Not the rehearsed kind, not the performative camera-ready remorse she used to be so good at. This was the awkward, clumsy, genuine kind. The kind that comes with blisters on the soul. The foundation began to thrive in ways I never imagined. With Paige's skills in marketing and digital outreach, our small project gained attention not from the media circus she once basked in, but from women's centers, nonprofits, and educators who wanted to build similar models. She redesigned the website herself, creating a virtual memorial page titled The Forgotten Mothers. Each profile shared a short story, a woman who had been left behind, minimized, or manipulated by her family, followed by how the fund had helped them stand again. One profile read, "I was told I was too expensive to keep. Now I own my home and I offer shelter to others who've been told the same. Florence A." Each time I read a new story, I felt my ribs expand a little more, like there had been a tightness I didn't realize was still there, slowly loosening its grip. But growth comes with its own challenges. At one meeting, a younger woman, perhaps in her 30s, stood up during our community lunch and asked Paige, "Why should we trust you? You abandoned your own mother. Why are you here now?" The air went still. Paige didn't flinch. "I deserve that," she said. "And I don't have an answer you'll believe yet. But I'm here to earn it. Not just from my mother. From all of you." The woman sat down, and I looked at my daughter. Not the millionaire, not the influencer, not the woman who gave away a ranch, but a human being finally learning how to carry weight she once ran from. After the meeting, Paige and I stayed behind to tidy the chairs. She didn't speak until the last one was stacked. "Do you ever think about the ranch?" she asked quietly. I shrugged. "Not really." I was trying to prove something, she said, that I could belong to them. I nodded. "And now, I think I just want to belong to myself, and maybe one day, to you again." I turned toward her, placed my hand on her cheek like I used to when she was a fevered child. "You were always mine, Paige, even when you forgot." Her eyes shimmered. She leaned in. "Thank you for not shutting the door." "I thought about it," I whispered with a wry smile. We both laughed. Months later, we held the first official Whitmore Fund Gala. Nothing fancy. Just community, stories, old women in bright scarves, young women with notebooks. Paige gave a speech short and honest. "This foundation is not just my mother's legacy. It's her forgiveness made public, and I hope to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that grace." The applause was quiet but real, and as I looked around the room, I saw something I never expected. My daughter, not above anyone, not behind me but beside me. A partner. A witness. After the event, we walked out together under a soft night sky, stars pricking the darkness. She slipped her arm into mine. We didn't say much, just walked, until Paige whispered, "You know, I've been thinking about what to do with the money from the ranch sale." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "I want to donate it. Not in my name, in yours." I stopped. "Why?" She looked at me, eyes clear. "Because that land never belonged to me. But this work does. And you planted it." I said nothing, just reached for her hand. And for the first time in our long, messy story, we held on. The check arrived 2 weeks later. A certified donation from the sale of the ranch property. $472,880. 13 after taxes, fees, and a modest legal scuffle with Chad, who had tried to claim part of the proceeds. Paige handled it herself. She even paid for her own attorney. When the money landed in the foundation's account, I stared at the numbers like they might vanish if I blinked too long. It wasn't just about the money, it was what it represented. An undoing. A reversal of values. Paige had taken a symbol of her betrayal and turned it into a cornerstone for justice. I didn't tell her how much it meant. I didn't need to. She already knew. We put the funds to work immediately. We expanded the emergency grant program. We started a pilot housing assistance project for women 65 and older facing eviction. And we launched a mobile legal aid clinic so no woman would have to fight alone in a courtroom again. Florence, ever the force of nature, offered to run the herb garden therapy sessions for survivors of emotional abuse. Marta led financial literacy classes. Joyce hosted a storytelling night once a month where women could share, cry, and be heard sometimes for the first time in years. And Paige? She showed up. Every time. She sat quietly in the back of rooms, took notes, washed dishes, and asked questions that no longer sought applause, but understanding. She even started writing again. Not blog posts or curated captions, letters. Handwritten, long-form letters to women who'd received grants, each one personalized. She sent them with a single line at the bottom. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. And somehow these letters began circulating. Women pinned them to kitchen corkboards, tucked them into Bibles, laminated them like holy cards. Something was happening, something sacred. Then one morning, I woke to find a package on my doorstep. Inside was a framed photo. Paige and I at the first gala, both smiling, her hand on mine. On the back a note. For years I tried to make you smaller so I could feel bigger. I forgot that I was already enough. Because you believed I was. I hope this sits somewhere quiet but visible like the love I'm trying to rebuild. Paige. I placed the frame in the hallway next to my husband's memorial photo. Not as forgiveness but as proof of growth. We don't erase the past here. We repurpose it. Weeks passed. Life fell into a rhythm. Then came Mother's Day. The same day, 1 year later. I hadn't thought much about it. I was planning to spend the morning tending to my roses, the afternoon reviewing applications for the next grant round, and the evening with Florence and Marta watching old black and white movies. But Paige had other plans. At precisely 8. Zoea. She knocked on my door. When I opened it, she was standing there in jeans and a soft yellow sweater. No flowers, no jewelry, no velvet bags. Just a warm thermos of coffee in one hand and in the other, a simple leather-bound notebook. Happy Mother's Day, she said. No gifts this time. Just a story. I furrowed my brow. A story. She handed me the notebook. Inside were 36 entries, each one dated, each one recounting a memory. You sang to me the night before my first piano recital because I was afraid I'd mess up. You stayed up past midnight sewing my costume when the other moms bought theirs. You gave up your vacation that year so I could go to debate camp. Each page, a piece of me reflected in her words. Each entry, a brick in the bridge back to trust. I sat on the porch and read for an hour. Paige didn't rush me. She just sat beside me quietly, sipping coffee, eyes fixed on the garden. When I reached the final page, I turned to her. Why did you write these? She shrugged, blinking away tears. Because I didn't want to forget again. And I thought, maybe someday you'd want to remember with me. I closed the notebook, gently held it to my chest. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my arms and she leaned in. No air kiss, no guarded hug. A real one. Tear-stained, trembling, rooted in soil we both thought had gone dry. That evening, we sat at the Foundation's new community kitchen with over 100 women, some founders, some fund recipients, some volunteers. Each of them brought a photo of the woman who had raised them. Paige brought mine. She held it up during her short speech. This is my mother, she said. And I used to think the greatest gift she gave me was sacrifice. But I was wrong. It was the ability to come home and still be received. The room stood in silence. Then applause. Slow. Then thunderous. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just a mother. I was a matriarch. A legacy not of wealth or perfection, but of grace earned in the aftermath of forgetting. In the months that followed that second Mother's Day, something shifted, not just in Paige, not just in me, but in the world around us. The Foundation's name began to appear in more places. A local magazine called us the quiet thunder of our time. A retired senator mentioned us in a speech about elder dignity. Even a high school civics class invited Paige and me to speak about legacy and restitution. But more than the headlines and interviews, it was the small, almost invisible moments that told me we were building something real. One morning, I received a letter written in scratchy pencil on ruled paper. No return address. I'm 74. My son says I'm too paranoid to live alone, so he's moving me into a home next week. I don't want to go, but I don't know how to say no. At the bottom, is there someone I can call? Yes, there was us now. Paige and I were working late at the foundation office one Thursday evening when the lights flickered off and the storm rolled in. She lit a few battery-powered candles we kept in a drawer, and we found ourselves sitting in the soft glow surrounded by cardboard files and old receipts. "Do you ever wonder if he knew this would happen?" she asked. "Your father?" She nodded. "Sometimes," I said, "but I think he hoped for the best and prepared for the worst." That's what love looks like when you've lived long enough to see both. She rested her chin in her hands. "I wish I could talk to him," she whispered. "I think he'd be disappointed." I looked at her for a long time. "No," I said. "He'd be proud that you're still writing." She smiled, eyes shining. "You think so?" "I know," so I said. "Because he believed in redemption. He just didn't know if you would." Huh. The next week, Paige took on her most difficult project yet. She volunteered to lead a session for estranged mothers and daughters. 12 pairs, all with miles of silence between them, sat in a circle in the foundation's small meeting hall. I didn't attend. Not because I didn't care, but because some things must be done without a safety net. Later that night, she came to my house and sat at the kitchen table, her shoulders tense. "How did it go?" I asked. She exhaled long and slow. I told them the story, she said. The ranch, the check, the silence, everything. And one woman left, she said, but the others stayed. Some cried, some didn't. One mother asked her daughter, "Would you recognize me if you didn't need something, eh?" And the room went still. I walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's the sound of the truth settling in," I said. She nodded. "Do you think I've made up for it?" she asked. "No," I said gently, "and you never will." Her eyes widened, stung. I continued, "Because it's not about making up for the past. It's about showing up for the present." She swallowed slowly, nodding. "I can do that," she said. "I know," I replied. We created a new grant in the foundation after that, the Showing Up Grant. A small but powerful gesture, $5,000 awards, to women who had reconciled with estranged children or family members and who were committed to building a new chapter with them. Not perfect, just honest. Applications flooded in. Stories poured over us like spring rain. I forgave my daughter after she accused me of stealing from her wedding fund. My son and I spoke for the first time in 18 years over a cup of coffee in a hospital cafeteria. She walked into my kitchen and said, "I was wrong." And I said, "I still kept your room just in case." We weren't just giving out money anymore. We were giving permission. Permission to speak. Permission to hurt. Permission to try again. Later that fall, Paige came to me with an idea. "I want to write a book," she said. "Oh, not about the scandal. Not about the trust. About you. About us. About what it means to be remembered differently than you were treated." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot of truth to package." "I think the world is ready," she said. I paused. "And are you ready?" I asked. She smiled. "I think I've finally stopped performing long enough to find my own voice." I nodded. "Then write it," I said. "But don't make me the hero." "I won't," she replied. "I'll just make you the reason." The first draft arrived in a manila envelope thick with fresh ink and bound with a soft blue ribbon, Paige's way of blending formality with apology. She titled it, "Inheritance of Silence, A Daughter's Reckoning." I hesitated before opening it, not because I feared what was inside, but because I knew it would be the closest I'd ever come to hearing my daughter confess the truths she could never say aloud. The preface began, "This is not a story about money. It is a story about debt, the kind you can't repay with wire transfers or grand gestures. It is about the quiet, sturdy woman who gave me her voice when I had none, and who I later silenced to make room for my ambition. I wrote this not to be forgiven, but to be remembered alongside her, not behind her." I wept. quietly, alone in my reading chair by the window where the light always lands just right. Not because I was sad, because someone had finally seen me in full. The book was published 6 months later, modestly through a small press that specialized in intergenerational memoirs. No national tour, no press blitz, just community readings, small libraries, and women's groups. But the effect? Profound. Letters poured in again. I gave this book to my daughter. We cried together. For the first time, I believe I'm not alone in this anger. Your story helped me write the first sentence of my own. One woman, 83, wrote, I've never been brave enough to tell my daughter what she took from me. But I handed her your book, and she finally asked if I ever felt forgotten. I said yes. And then she held my hand and said, she didn't want that to be my last chapter. We began hosting Mother in Memory circles through the Foundation's safe spaces for women to read from their own stories, sometimes aloud, sometimes just to themselves, and sometimes they asked Paige to read it for them. A strange twist of fate, the daughter who once muted her mother's voice, now becoming the voice for mothers everywhere. She never declined. She never made it about her. That perhaps was the most miraculous change. One chilly November morning, I sat in the community garden now named the Whitmore Grove, watching Florence teach a group of young girls how to identify winter herbs by touch alone. Paige arrived in a long wool coat and gloves, holding 2 cups of coffee. Still can't get you to switch to oat milk, she teased. I'm too old to follow fads, I smiled. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the leaves fall in slow, golden spirals. Then she turned to me. Chad filed for divorce, she said. I blinked. She shrugged. We were pretending. For a long time. But pretending is exhausting when you start telling the truth elsewhere. I touched her hand. Are you okay? I think so, she said. I finally looked around at what I'd built with him and realized it was all for show. But with you, this foundation, these women, it's real. She took a breath. And I want to rebuild something real. That evening, she moved in with me temporarily. Not as a broken woman, but as a rebuilding one. We shared coffee in the mornings, silence in the afternoons, and stories in the evenings. She helped me prune the garden, organize the pantry without being asked, and insisted on learning my lemon pie recipe exactly the way I used to make it for her birthday. And I let her come back. Not as the prodigal daughter, but as a grown woman finally learning how to be tender again. The book was eventually picked up by a larger publisher who requested an expanded edition. They wanted a final chapter. She came to me and asked, would you write it with me? I hesitated. I don't know if I want to be an author, I said. You already are, she replied. You wrote the best parts of me. So we sat side by side at the kitchen table, 2 pens, 2 cups of tea, 1 old candle flickering between us. And we wrote the final chapter together, titled, Love When Spoken Late Still Arrives on Time. The release of the expanded edition took us both by surprise. We had expected it to land quietly, as it always had with book clubs, libraries, and a few whispered thank yous in the mail. But this time, the story caught the attention of someone who had the power to amplify whispers into echoes. An independent producer, an older woman herself, reached out with a proposal. Have you considered adapting the book into a stage production? I blinked. Paige looked stunned. I wrote this as a confession, she said. I never meant for it to be performed. The woman replied gently, maybe that's exactly why it should be. 6 months later, the first performance opened in a modest black box theater in Chicago. The production was simple. A single chair, 2 women, a rotating backdrop of projected letters and journal entries. No grand sets, no dramatic lighting, just truth spoken aloud in the voices of a mother and her daughter. The silence between them became its own character. At the final curtain call, there wasn't applause at first, just stillness, tears. Then one woman stood, clapped once, then another, and another, until the room was vibrating with release. Paige and I sat in the back row, hands clasped. I didn't realize it would be so heavy, she whispered. It always was, I replied. You just never had to carry it before. After the show, women lined up not for autographs, but for connection. An 82-year-old woman in a floral head wrap took my hand and said I came alone. But now I feel like I'm going home with 100 sisters. Another simply hugged Paige and whispered, "You gave me the courage to write to my mother's grave." It spread from there, city to city, state to state. Not viral in the way of celebrity or scandal, but contagious in a quieter way. A story that moved hand to hand, heart to heart. They began calling it the Inheritance Tour. Not about money, but about reclaiming what had been emotionally stolen. One night after a show in Minneapolis, Paige and I sat in a small hotel room sharing room service fries and talking about the future. "I think I want to adopt," she said suddenly. I looked at her. "I always thought I needed to give a child the perfect life to deserve motherhood," she continued. "But now I realize I just need to show up. The way you did. The way these women do." I reached across the bed and took her hand. "I think you'll make a beautiful mother," she laughed. "I'll be scared out of my mind." "Good." I smiled. "That means you'll care enough to learn." Back at home, the foundation continued to grow. We opened a second location, added legal resources therapy partnerships, and even launched a small retreat center called The Second Bloom, where women could come to rest and write and remember. We hired from within Joyce, Marta, Florence, and even younger women who had once come to us in pain and now returned in power. Paige moved into a small home not far from mine. Nothing fancy, just hers. She painted the kitchen herself, hung wind chimes in the front window, and hosted Sunday dinners that didn't feel like performances but gatherings. Real, messy, beautiful gatherings. At one of those dinners, she stood up with a toast. "I used to think my legacy would be built on brands and properties," she said. "But it turns out it was built in the pause between sentences. The hand on a shoulder. The forgiveness you don't think you deserve, but someone offers anyway." She raised her glass. "To the women who showed me how to begin again." And everyone toasted. But I didn't speak. I simply looked at her and nodded, because that was all she needed, and everything I never thought I'd get to give her again. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the dishes had been washed, Paige and I sat on her porch as fireflies blinked into the early spring dark. She turned to me. "Do you still think about the ranch?" she asked, just like she had once before. This time I laughed. "No," I said. "But I do think about the garden we planted after." She smiled. "That garden saved me." "No," I replied. "You saved yourself. The garden just reminded you where your roots were." And then, in a voice almost too soft to hear, she asked, "Do you think he'd be proud of me now?" I looked out into the night sky. "I think I said he'd be proud that you finally learned how to come home." The following spring, the foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary. What began as a quiet act of reclamation, a response to a check and a ranch, had become something far more enduring. A haven, a movement, and perhaps most sacred of all, a place where women didn't have to prove they were worth remembering. We hosted the celebration at the Second Bloom Retreat Center. It was simple picnic tables under strings of white lights, tea lights nestled in mason jars, and fresh wildflowers arranged by women who had once walked into our doors needing help and now returned offering joy. Paige was in charge of organizing the event. She delegated, calmly moved gracefully through the crowd, and didn't try to be the center of attention. She just made space. At one point, I found her kneeling beside Florence, adjusting her seat cushion with the kind of tenderness I once feared she had forgotten how to show. How strange and beautiful to witness a daughter learn how to mother with no child of her own, just the aching wisdom of having once broken something sacred and learned how to piece it back together. The main program was short. A few words from Marta, a poem from Joyce, a quiet acoustic song sung by a 19-year-old who had been raised by her grandmother and never knew why until she read our book. Then came the final moment. Paige took the stage. There was no microphone. She didn't need one. She stood in the hush and held up the notebook she had once given me, now weathered at the edges and thick with new entries. "This is what I inherited," she said, "and this is what I've added." She opened the notebook and read 3 short passages, stories from women in our program, each ending with the same sentence. "And still I chose love." Then she closed the book and looked directly at me. Mom, she said, I was taught that love was measured in money and sacrifice, in things that glitter. But now I know real love shows up when no one's watching. Real love builds without asking for applause. Real love forgives in a whisper and grows in silence. I felt tears gather in my eyes, not from grief, not even from pride, but from something deeper, peace. She smiled. I know you didn't do all this to teach me a lesson, but I learned one anyway. And with that, she stepped down and joined me at the table. She didn't ask for validation. She just sat, took my hand and held it like an anchor. After the event, I stayed behind. I walked the path between the garden beds as twilight folded over the sky. Bees retreated. The petals closed. The air smelled of basil and lilac. I came to the wooden sign at the garden's edge carved years ago by a volunteer with shaky hands.